Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Mursaleen wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Okay, the topic that we're going to cover today, inshallah, or we're going to start with today, Islam and evolution. It's a very important subject, it's a very pertinent subject, very relevant. I'm sure many of you, if not most of you, have received questions, have faced this challenge, whether or not evolution is compatible with Islam. If it's incompatible with Islam, does that mean Islam is against modern science? And often this equation is made between evolution and modern science. So if Islam is against evolution, then that means that Islam is against science. And this is a very, very common challenge, a very, very common fitna. It's a question that I get asked by my maktab students. So it's important that we address it. And it's also important that it's addressed at a level that can be communicated with a general audience who does not have the technical knowledge when it comes to biology and science. Because often what happens is people are awestruck, are overawed by the jargon, by the technical language that some of these popularizers of evolution use. And because of that, they buy into it. Not because of the substance of the argument, but because of the way it's expressed. So it's important that we can break it down and simplify it. Just to start with, what I will mention is that because it's important to have the correct intention, the ulama have mentioned different intentions, niyat, which are acceptable and approved to Allah when it comes to acquiring knowledge. One of them is tasheehul amal and tasheehul i'tiqad, for oneself, for the benefit of oneself, to correct one's own amal and one's own aqidah, belief, and make sure that it's in accordance with what Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam have taught. And a second valid intention is also to acquire the knowledge in order to be able to convey it to others. And of course, this is something that is a very common, a very widespread issue. So we should have that intention that inshallah we acquire this understanding and this knowledge in order to be able to help and benefit and guide others. Inshallah, there will be time, I believe, for question and answers, and we do have this chat feature. So if you have any questions along the way, feel free to ask questions. So what we're going to start with is some basic questions: what, why, and how. What is evolution? Why do we as Muslims need to study evolution and talk about it from a theological perspective, and from the perspective of Islam, the Islamic understanding, and thirdly, how do we go about it? What's the methodology taught to us by our tradition, by our intellectual tradition, about how to address such problems? So on the first question of what is evolution? And this is an important question, regardless of what subject, what concept we are looking at, but with evolution especially, because there are multiple different usages of evolution. And as I'm sure most of you have heard of the maxim, which is also just common sense, al-hukmu ala shay'i far'un an tasawwurihi, that to make a judgment, to make an assessment on something, you have to first conceptualize it and conceive of it correctly. So it's important to know what we mean by evolution before we tackle it, before we talk about it, before we study it, and before we look at what is the Islamic perspective on it. And broadly speaking, evolution has three meanings. The first meaning is change, that life has undergone changes throughout its history on Earth. And this meaning of evolution is uncontroversial. Everybody agrees with this. There's no disagreement about it. That life had a past. Life is different today to what it was in the past. Right? So there were life forms that existed in the past that don't exist today. You know, there were dinosaurs and dodos and trilobites and so on that existed in the past that don't exist today. And then there are life forms that exist today that don't exist in the past. And also we notice, we observe certain small changes that occur say in the frequency of certain characteristics, right? So there might be a feature, there might be a characteristic or a feature in one type of living thing, like in human beings. There might be a certain feature, like a dark skin, for example, which at one point is very common and then it becomes quite rare, or vice versa, right? So this is a type of evolution, and sometimes evolution is used in this meaning, in the meaning of that life had a history and these small changes. And sometimes there are changes that are actually new, that didn't exist before, and we'll come back to this later on. And these are very small scale changes which nobody contests. Right? So that's the first meaning. The second meaning is universal common descent. Right? So universal common descent or universal common ancestry. What this means is that all life on Earth are related to each other by common ancestry. So what is common ancestry? So it's pretty straightforward. So common ancestry means that you share a common ancestor. So if you take two or more individuals, if you say they are, let's say they're siblings, like brothers and sisters, then they share a common ancestor who is their parent. Right? So their parent, their father, is a common ancestor. Or if you have cousins, then their parent's parent is a common ancestor. Their parents are not common ancestors, but their parents' parents are common ancestors. As in, they share an ancestor. If you go up their, one generation to the next, you will come to a point where they share an ancestor who is the same. That's common ancestry. And we as Muslims, of course, believe that all human beings, all humankind share a common ancestor, and that's Adam alayhi salam. Right? The Prophet ﷺ, he said in a hadith in Musnad Ahmad, "Inna rabbakum wahid wa inna abakum wahid." That your maker, your creator, your master is one, as Allah, and your father is one, and that's Adam alayhi salam. And it's also in the Quran, in the first verse of Surah An-Nisa, يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء. That Allah made humankind from one person, and that's Adam alayhi salam. And from that one person, he made its mate, its partner, and that's Hawa. And from these two, he spread out many men and many women. So all the men and all the women, all human beings are descended from these two. So we all share Adam and Hawa as our common ancestors. But the idea of universal common descent doesn't limit it there. All right? So it extends it beyond that. So the idea of universal common descent is that it's not just limited to one type of living thing, but it extends to all living things. So it's not just that human beings share common ancestry with each other, but rather that human beings share common ancestry with other types of living things. All right. So, and not just human beings, but all types of living things. So, dogs, cats, crocodiles, fish, mice, elephants, chimpanzees, gorillas, every type of living thing, not just, they don't just share common ancestry within their type, but also outside of their type with other types of living things. So, and the idea is that if there's one type of living thing which is more similar to another type, then their common ancestor is more recent. So according to evolutionists, human beings are most closely related to chimpanzees. So they would say that if you trace the ancestry of human beings up generation after generation after generation, and as well as chimpanzees, there'll come a point where they share a common ancestor. And they say you can do the same thing with human beings and gorillas. You can do the same thing with human beings and pigs, with human beings and mice and fish. But it's just that the common ancestor for human beings and chimpanzees would be more recent, whereas the common ancestor with chimpanzees and dogs would be more older. So this is the idea of universal common descent. Now, the third meaning of evolution is one type of organism, one type of living thing, changing into another type by a natural process. And when we say by a natural process, what we mean is without the intervention of a creator. Without the intervention of anything supernatural, with any intelligent mind, just natural processes by themselves create new types of living things from old types. All right. So for example, evolutionists will tell you they believe that fish turned into many millions of years ago. Fish turned into animals that walk on land animals. So that's a huge transformation that must have taken place. So how did that transformation take place? So they will tell you that transformation took place by means of natural processes. Now, what are those natural processes? And here there are there's the famous theory. And the famous theory is Darwin's theory. And then in its contemporary form is called neo-Darwinism, or is called the modern evolutionary synthesis. Right? So the modern evolutionary synthesis, MES, was put together in the 20th century, in the 1930s onwards. And it's the process of natural selection working in tandem with random mutation. We'll come back to this later on. But there are other processes that mainly because of the failure of that process, even theoretically being able to produce the type of changes that are required to create these transformations. That's why some scientists in the last decade or so have come up with have said that we have to move past the modern evolutionary synthesis and to create new theories. And these new theories are lumped together in what's called the extended evolutionary synthesis, or EES. And they all suffer from serious problems. And we'll touch on some later on, inshallah. So these are the three meanings of evolution. And it's only the second and third meanings that we need to talk about, because they're the ones that are controversial. So that moves us on to the third question, second question. Why do we need to study evolution? So the reason why this question needs to be asked is because we don't normally question scientific ideas or theories or mathematical theorems or anything of that sort. So if somebody has an idea about geography or history, we don't normally question them. So why are we questioning this? It's that we don't question scientific theories or ideas as long as they don't conflict with our beliefs as Muslims, with what we believe based on wahi. And wahi, a revelation from Allah through the mediums of Quran and Sunnah, are for us the highest form of knowledge. So if something conflicts with that and it's becoming widespread and it's something that is being widely accepted, then we have to challenge that. And so what is the conflict? So where is the conflict between evolution in the second and third meanings with Islam? Now the conflict really lies in two areas. The first is something quite obvious that we all are aware of, and the second is a bit more subtle, but is also just as fundamental. All right. So the first is that, of course, the idea of universal common descent conflicts with our belief about Adam alayhi salam. That Adam alayhi salam was created especially by Allah directly. Obviously, you wouldn't say there's this technical term called de novo, created just out of nothing. You wouldn't say that. Obviously, Allah could do that. But Allah created Adam alayhi salam using some material from the earth, using soil and water and so on. But He created him without the agency of parents, without the intermediary, without the wasita of ancestors and parents. He created him directly, and then created Hawa from Adam alayhi salam. Right. So evolution conflicts with Islamic belief from that perspective. And the second area in which Islam conflicts with evolution is really the third meaning of evolution, which we just discussed, which is that transformations or new characteristics can originate in living things, or even new forms of living things can originate without a need for an intelligent creator, or without the need for a creator, and just by natural processes. And as we will see, this idea itself is, in terms of its evidential basis, quite weak, scientifically speaking, in terms of empirical science. And the reason why it was so widely accepted is because of the fact that it rules out God and a creator, not because of the strength of the evidence. Right? And this idea that natural processes can create new forms of life and can create novelties and new characteristics within living things goes against, as I've noted here, first of all, it goes against our intuition. It goes against common sense. So you could be a complete non-specialist. You don't know anything about science, but you can see that there's something troubling about this, something that doesn't add up. So what is that? What is that thing that doesn't add up? Right? I'll just recommend a book here, and I will just summarize this point, but a book called Undeniable, written a couple of years ago by a scientist by the name of Douglas Axe, who covers this angle to this issue. So the thing with living things is that they are very, very unique. And we don't think of them in this way because they're so commonplace. Living things, we see them everywhere. But there are things that are very, very remarkable about them, and which is completely incomparable to anything that human beings have made. So human beings have manufactured a lot of machines and so on, cars and aeroplanes and computers. But living things are complex to that level. In fact, to an even greater level. And beyond that, there are things things in living things which are completely beyond what we find in human inventions. Just to give you a couple of things, with human inventions, the more you use them, the more they wear out. Whereas with living things, if you don't use something, they start to degenerate. And in fact, by more use of them, the more they become stronger. And that's in fact something quite remarkable. And of course, there is a very, very complex mechanism behind why that is the case. And beyond that, living things can make copies of themselves. They reproduce, they replicate. And this is unique to living things. A cat is a cat, which is very, very complex in its own right. But not only that, it grows, it exploits its surroundings to grow, and then it makes a copy of itself. It makes another one of itself, and that cat that is reproduced, that is produced by its parent, then also grows and makes a copy of itself. Now, of course, this is commonplace for us. But if you think about it, you don't see this anywhere outside of living things. And definitely not in any human invention. And there were people, and it's more sci-fi than it is anything real. There were people who did try to imitate this aspect of living things, the ability to exploit the resources and the what's available around them to be able to make copies of themselves. But it has always ended up in failure. One book that discusses this is a work by an Australian scientist, Michael Denton, called Nature's Destiny, in which he tries to show that this is a capacity that is only possible using the material that you find in living things. So using things outside of living things. So living things are mainly made up of, proteins and DNA and lipids, carbohydrates, things that we will come to, inshallah, later on. Using things besides that, it's not possible to make something that can do that has this ability. It's unique to these to the material that you find in living things. Okay. That's at one level. So for example, you don't have a car that can make another car by itself. That's at one level. And at another level, something unique about living things is that when we look at it, we immediately understand that this is a product of genius. And so you look at a living thing and you marvel at it. You're awestruck. That's why you go to the zoo. To marvel at this artistry, this work of genius, this work of art. Right? And it's different to when we marvel at other things, when we marvel at the clouds or at the mountains, mountains and so on. There is a difference. And sometimes it's difficult to pinpoint that difference, but really what it comes down to is purpose. When you look with living things, they are very, very complex, made up of a lot of different parts, which are different to one another. Those parts are not just like building blocks or all the same, but they're very, very different, have very, very complex shapes and so on. And they come together to fulfill a greater or overall objective. Okay? So the eyes, for example, the eye is made up of many different parts, and all of those parts come together, and they're all needed in order to fulfill the very obvious function of creating sight, of sensing light. And same thing with ears. The ears are for hearing. Fins in fish are for swimming. Limbs are for walking. Wings are for flying. Right? So the complex arrangement of these parts are for a purpose. There's a purposeful arrangement to them. As opposed to, say, when you see the arrangement of clouds, you wouldn't say, oh, those clouds are arranged in a way to do something. You don't see any purpose. With living things, you do. The complex arrangements are for a purpose. And this, Douglas Axe calls it functional coherence. We have complex subcomponents working together to complete an overall function. It always indicates to us that that thing was designed. That thing was put together, was planned by a conscious mind that had in mind what it wants to create at the end. So he had a plan in mind that I want to make this at the end, and then put it all together to make that happen. These things, inventions of this kind of with functional coherence, don't happen by accident. They don't happen by natural processes. That's one perspective from which it goes against our intuition. And another perspective is that living things, they see and they hear and they fly. They are conscious. But natural processes are not. Natural processes, meaning material, matter, motion, energy, and so on, they don't see, they don't hear. They know nothing about optics. They know nothing about the physics of sound. They know nothing about hearing and seeing and flying and aviation. They know nothing about engineering. Yet, are we supposed to believe that they created marvels of engineering, marvels of design, marvels of optics? Right? We understand that, and this is also something Quranic, that something that needs knowledge in order to create cannot be made without knowledge. Right? So the Quran says, وَهُوَ الْخَلَّاقُ الْعَلِيمُ. It puts together khalq and ilm to show that without knowledge, this creation could not be created. And Imam al-Tahawi, in his Aqidah, Tahawi says, خَلَقَ الْخَلْقَ بِعِلْمِ. He created the creation while having knowledge of it. And Imam al-Ghaznawi, in his commentary of this statement, he said, وَإِنَّمَا الْقَرَنَ التَّخْلِيقَ بِالْعِلْمِ لِأَنَّ الْعِلْمَ بِالْمَخْلُوقِ مِنْ شَرْطِ التَّخْلِيقِ. That in order to be able to create, it's necessary to have knowledge. And obviously, material, matter and so on, does not have knowledge. It doesn't know how to create something that has this functional coherence. Obviously, if it doesn't have this purposefulness, like the arrangement of rocks on a mountain, yeah, natural processes can make that, can create that, because that's the product of accidents, wind and erosion and so on. but something that has functional coherence by our intuition and understanding, common sense, which is actually supported by the evidence, as we'll see, does not create, right, things that have functional coherence. So Richard Dawkins, a very, very famous atheist, materialist, popularizer of evolution, he says about living things that they overwhelm. This is in his Blind Watchmaker. He says that living things overwhelmingly impress us with the appearance of design as if by a master watchmaker. So that's a quote from him. Living things overwhelmingly impress us with the appearance of design as if by a master watchmaker. And of course, he doesn't believe that it was designed by a master watchmaker, but by a conscious, intelligent creator. He believes that this appearance is an illusion. Because, and why does he believe that? It's because of his commitment to materialism. It's because of his strong faith in materialism and atheism and the powers of natural processes. But this strong faith in nature and materialism is very, very misguided. Right? So that's from the perspective of our common sense. From the perspective of the scriptures, from the Quran and Sunnah, what we find is that there's a running theme in the Quran and the Sunnah that life is miraculous. Life is outside of the reach of, let alone nature, it's outside of the reach of human beings. Human beings cannot create life and cannot create new types of life. So one of the things that is attributed to Allah specifically and solely is ihya'ul mawta, and just ihya, just giving life. So there's a famous contention in the Quran from the mushrikun, which the Quran responds to, which is that how will Allah give life to dead matter once it's just matter and it has no life? How will Allah give life to that? Right? And the Quran does not reject the istiba'ad of that. How strange that seems, that dead matter is given life, because that is strange. Right? The Quran doesn't say, well, natural processes can do that. It doesn't say that natural processes can turn an existing living thing into a new one. Rather, it says, no, this is my domain. This is Allah's domain. Right? I created you to start with, so I can create you again. ضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة. The one who made it in the first place, he's the one that would give it life. And when Ibrahim alayhi salam in the Quran, he mentions that he wanted a demonstration of Allah's power, what's the thing that he asked for a demonstration? He asked a demonstration of. It's giving life to the dead. It wasn't anything else. Reason being that giving life to the dead is the most remarkable thing. So Allah showed him how he does that. He gave a demonstration, and he didn't show it by material processes, natural processes, making something else, becoming something else. Rather, he showed him just by directly showing his power, making something dead into coming to life. And we find that in the Sunnah, there's a prohibition of making images of living things, and one of the reasons given is Allah has effectively copyrighted the creation of living things, or making drawings and pictures and statues of living things, and it says that in the Akhirah, these people who make these images, they will be told ahyu ma khalaqtum, bring to life what you've created, effectively saying that this is not in your capacity. It's not in your capacity to create life. Now, if we said that natural processes and nature is capable on its own to make life to begin with, and then to make innovations on that life, to build on that and create biological complexity and new forms of life, then that makes us lose our awe of life, of the picture of life. And it clearly goes against this running theme throughout the Quran. This is a quote from Ernst Chain. He was a very prominent scientist from the 20th century and you find these rare cases of very prominent scientists who opposed evolution and opposed the trend. He was he won the Nobel Prize for the production of penicillin, the first antibiotic, together with two others, Alexander Fleming and somebody else. He died in 1979. So he said this hypothesis, meaning evolution, willfully neglects the principle of teleological purpose. Teleological purpose just means the obvious appearance of design, which stares the biologist in the face wherever he looks. So wherever the biologist looks, in whatever aspect of living things, this is unique about biology. Whenever you're studying anything, you always ask why. Why is this like this? Why is this here? You don't do that with anything else, right? Unless it's man-made, right? Unless it's a man-made invention, unless it's also something intelligently designed. You don't say that with the cloud or with the rock. Why is this rock here rather than there? But you do that with biology, because biology is something that shows purpose, intentionality in every level, not just at the gross level, but also at the molecular level, which has only been discovered in the last century or so. And he says the classical evolutionary theories are a gross oversimplification of an immensely complex and intricate mass of facts, and it amazes me that they were swallowed so uncritically and readily, and for such a long time by so many scientists without a murmur of protest. And this is a quote from Francis Crick, who is a very famous biochemist. He's the co-discoverer of the structure of DNA. You probably heard of Watson and Crick. Crick is the second one, Francis Crick. And he is a materialist, evolutionist. So he says biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. As in, you have to keep programming yourself, keep telling yourself, oh no, this was not designed. Because it's so obvious that the explanation of design is so obvious and so clear and stares you in the face. But they have to keep telling themselves, no, it was not designed. And this reminds you of, Allah says in the Quran, وَجَحَدُوا بِهَا وَاسْتَيْقَنَتْهَا أَنفُسُهُمْ ظُلْمًا وَعُلُوًا. That despite seeing the truth, it's right in front of their eyes, they're seeing miracle after miracle after miracle, they still deny it because they just can't accept a creator. Now the thing with Darwin's idea, you might ask, why was it accepted then? If the evidence is so weak, the reality is that 19th century science was very advanced, and so modern science at that point did reach quite a high level, and of course it's only progressed even further in the 20th century. And the majority of these very prominent scientists in Darwin's day did not accept Darwin's theory. They rejected it at the start, at least for the first 10 years or so, after the publication of On the Origin of Species. The majority of the biologists rejected his idea, and they said it's so obviously against what we see. What we see is each type of living thing was created separately by God. That's what we see. And that was the mainstream opinion at that time. And Darwin, in the first edition of On the Origin of Species in 1859, he even says that, he says, most eminent living naturalists and geologists reject this view of the mutability of species. And that's a direct quote from his book. And we're going to look at one example later on, who was probably the most prominent, probably the most knowledgeable paleontologist in his day, Louis Agassiz, from America, from Harvard. He strongly opposed Darwin's theory, right till his death. And we're going to look at some of the reasons why he did. And then later on in the 6th edition of his work on the origin of species, he mentions that things have changed. And this was in 1872. So Charles Darwin said, as a record of a former state of things, I have retained in the foregoing paragraphs and elsewhere several sentences which imply that naturalists meaning biologists, believe in the separate creation of each species. And I have been much censored for having thus expressed myself. But undoubtedly, this was the general belief when the first edition of the present work appeared. I formerly spoke to very many naturalists on the subject of evolution and never once met with any sympathetic agreement. Now things have wholly changed, and almost every naturalist admits the great principle of evolution. So this is only a period of, say, less than 15 years. And within these 15 years, there was no great breakthrough, no great new evidence that convinced everybody to believe in Darwin. Rather, what happened was, it was more, say, pressure, peer pressure, and a more changing of the current of the trend. And in 19th century, science was moving towards, it was becoming more materialistic. And it was this trend that pushed people to accept Darwin's theory. It wasn't actually the evidence. And this is stated explicitly by some 19th century commentators. And this is from a historian in the 20th century, Neil Gillespie, 1979. He wrote, it is sometimes said that Darwin converted the scientific world to evolution by showing them the process by which it occurred. Yet the uneasy reservations about natural selection amongst Darwin's contemporaries and the widespread rejection of it from the 1890s to the 1930s suggest that this is too simple a view of the matter. It was more Darwin's insistence on totally natural explanations than natural selection that won their adherence. So, as I said, the living world is probably one of the clearest proofs of God. And so what Darwin did was he took God out of the picture. And that's why he was embraced. So it was like a mythology for atheism, for materialism. This is Thomas Nagel from America, a very prominent philosopher, an atheist philosopher. So he said, Darwin enabled modern secular culture to heave a great collective sigh of relief. Richard Dawkins, Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. So Richard Dawkins, in the introduction to his book, The Blind Watchmaker, he expresses in much the same terms that I have been about why living things look designed. They look like they were put together purposefully by a conscious, intelligent mind. He even defines biology in that way. He says biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. And he says all of these things, that fish look like they were designed to swim. Moles look like they were designed to burrow under the ground. Birds to fly. Humans to run. Certain animals to climb trees. They look like that. And that's just at the gross level, but even at the molecular level, you can say that even at the small level, all the things that you find in living things, they're all there for a purpose. And this just screams design. And this is Douglas Axe, who I mentioned before. So he writes, in the end, what gets passed off by intellectuals as a pillar, meaning as a pillar of biology, meaning evolution, is really a crutch, a way for atheists to pretend to have explained what is absolutely inexplicable apart from God. As theists, we have the one true explanation, an explanation that's not just plausible, but uniquely plausible. It is the explanation. So now that moves us on to the third question, how? So what, why, and now how do we tackle evolution? So this is where we employ the Kalam method. Maulana Ashraf Ali Athanawi, he has this book against modernism, which we are going to quote from shortly, inshallah. And in the beginning of the book, Al-Intibahat Mufida fi Hal al-Ishtibahat al-Jadida, he mentioned that some people have suggested that we introduce a new kalam, we call it a kalam al-Jadid. And Maulana Athanawi says that no, we don't need to introduce a new kalam. The methodology that the Kalam Qadim has taught us is sufficient, even though the juz'iyat, the specific issues, might be different based on the day and age that we're in. So this Kalam method, basically, as stated here, so what we do is, whenever we're confronted with any challenge to what we believe, is first of all, number one, we state our belief as proven from the nusus and the understanding of the Salaf. Secondly, we prove this belief from the nusus. And thirdly, present the beliefs and arguments of the opposition. And fourthly, answer these arguments using their system of knowledge, while accepting revelation as the highest source of knowledge. Right. So this is Sunni Kalam. And those scholars who opposed Kalam, they really opposed these third and fourth parts. They said, if you present the beliefs and arguments of the opposition, then you're exposing people to misguided views. So if we say that evolutionists believe this for this, and this reason, then you're exposing people to this view and the argument. And secondly, based on the fourth point, that if we're answering their arguments using their system of knowledge, then we're effectively accepting that their system of knowledge is superior, or apparently accepting that their system of knowledge is superior. Whereas we know that wahi is the highest source of knowledge. So these were why some of the scholars opposed the Kalam method. But the scholars who favored Kalam, and some of them wrote defenses of it, like Al-Bayhaqi and Ibn Asakir and others, they say it's when the shubha has become so widespread and there's a need to answer them on their terms that scholars had engaged in it. Otherwise, as a principle, yes, we should avoid it. And there's a statement from Imam Abu Hanifa saying pretty much that. He said, يُكْرَهُ الْكَلَامُ فِي الْكَلَامِ مَا لَمْ يَقَعْ شُبْهَةٌ فَإِذَا وَقَعَتْ شُبْهَةٌ تَجِبُ إِزَالَتُهَا. All right, so now that this shubha has occurred and is widespread, and it's in every household probably, we have to address it using this method. And of course, the system of knowledge that we're talking about is science, which is that what they use to oppose what we know through wahi. So what is science? Where does that fall in our epistemology? So in the books of Kalam, you have a section called Asbabul Ilm, how we acquire knowledge. And there's three ways: khabar, his, and istidlal. Khabar is a report, and of course, if it's the report of a truthful, somebody who's truthful, like Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then we have to accept it. And that's where wahi comes. And then you have his, which is sense perception, like observation and what we see here and so on, and istidlal, which is reasoning. So science, empirical science, is basically an extension of his and istidlal. But again, it's important to define science. And there are three different ways that people use science. I'll just mention the first and the third because we are running short of time. So empirical science is what we understand as the method of science, where you make a hypothesis, you put forward an idea about the physical world, about how it works and so on, and then you test that against the evidence, against observations, against experiment. So that's a noble pursuit, you could say, and something that would lead us to knowledge. That's empirical science. The third is another meaning of science is establishment science, what scientists as a general believe and what they put forward as the scientific understanding. So when people say science says something, often they mean establishment science says something, not that they've checked the evidences to see that empirically this is actually supported by what science says. So for us, empirical science is what matters, not establishment science. Yes, it's true that the majority of scientists believe in evolution in the second and third meanings that we covered, universal common descent, and that new forms of life are created by natural processes. But is this supported by the empirical science? And as we will see, the answer to that is, from objective level, no. And there are scientists who accept that. I quoted Ernst Chain and Douglas Axe, and there are others as well, prominent scientists. Right. So following this procedure of the Kalam method, first of all, we have to state our beliefs. Our belief with regards to evolution is that, first of all, we believe that Adam alayhi salam was created without biological ancestors. And he was created directly, and all human beings originate from two parents, Adam and Hawa. And this belief is qat'i, meaning it's explicit from the evidence of the Quran and Sunnah. And so denial of it is not possible theologically. This is something that Monatano mentioned in that book that I mentioned, Al-Intibahat Mufida, which was written more than 100 years ago. So it was written in 1912, and it was basically an extension of a lecture that he delivered at Aligarh University, Al-Intibahat Mufida fi Hal al-Ishtibahat al-Jadida, and it's meant to be a general guideline on how to answer modernist challenges or challenges of the modern mind. And one thing he addresses is evolution. So I won't read this out because we are running short of time. But he basically says that Islam or the nusus of Quran and Sunnah, they don't directly or primarily discuss physical phenomena or physical aspects of the world. But sometimes they do, secondarily, or in order to fulfill some other purpose. And when they do, then we have to accept it, especially if it's categorically clear, as it is in the case, as it is in this case. And if there's any idea or theory that opposes it, then we have to reject it. Otherwise, it will amount to takdhib, or rejecting the kalam of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he says, one example that he mentions is khalqu. This is from the Arabic translation. So he didn't actually write this in Arabic, he wrote it in Urdu, and then it was translated into Arabic by Maulana Nurul Bashar under the supervision of Mufti Taqi Usmani Sahib. And it's also translated into English as well. I think it's called Answers to Modernism. And this is from the Arabic translation. So he says that the text, the Quran and Sunnah explicitly say that Adam alayhi salam, the first human being, was created from soil. فالقول بأن الحيوان قد تدرج شيئا فشيئا حتى أصبح إنسانا كما هو من أوهام داروين باطل قطعا لأن النص قد ورد بخلافه. Right? So this idea that animals gradually changed over time to become human beings, which is Darwin's theory, is definitely contrary to our texts. In answer to that question, I avoided that because we were running out of time. But technological science just basically, which is one way in which people use the word science, is what is the medical advances and technological advances, and sometimes the word science is used in that meaning. So science has achieved this and this, and then they would mention the technological advances that we enjoy. Yeah, so not very relevant. And this is a text from Muhammad Ali As-Sabuni, Sheikh Muhammad Ali Sabuni, the famous Mufassir, in his book An-Nubuwwah wal Anbiya, where he says that the text of the Quran يتبين لنا بجلاء ووضوح بطلان نظرية داروين التي تجعل أصل البشر ليس هو آدم. So the idea of Darwin that says that Adam alayhi salam did not originate from human beings, وإنما تفرع الناس على زعمه من سلالات أخرى. Rather, human beings have come from other species, وانحدروا من أصل آخر يختلف عن أصل آدم, and that they descended from a different species to the species of Adam alayhi salam. So this categorically goes against our nusus. And this is from a book by academic from South Africa, David Solomon Jalajal, where he is pro-evolution, and yet he admits that the Quran is categorically against the idea non-humans. He says the following is apparent from the textual evidence. Adam was created by God directly from earth. Both Adam and his wife were created by God without the agency of parents, and all human beings living on the earth today are the direct descendants of these two people. These are the conclusions that have been reached by all orthodox commentators on these texts of Quran and Sunnah. Right? And there are many, obviously, verses of the Quran, many hadiths that could be mentioned. Some the ayats of the Quran mention that Allah created Adam alayhi salam from soil, from clay, from water, and so on. And the clearest verse is in Surah Al Imran, ayah number 59. إن مثل عيسى عند الله كمثل آدم خلقه من تراب ثم قال له كن فيكون. That where the Quran draws an example between Adam alayhi salam and Isa alayhi salam. And the context of this ayah is that the Christians of Najran presented the miraculous birth of Isa alayhi salam as proof of his special status and effectively as proof of his divinity. So the Quran responds that Adam alayhi salam can be compared to Isa alayhi salam in the miraculous nature of his creation. And in fact, Adam alayhi salam was even more miraculous because he had neither father nor mother. And that's the only meaning of this ayah. And that's the meaning that was mentioned by all of the Mufassirin. One explanation that's reported from a Tabi'i, Muhammad ibn Ja'far Ibn Zubayr in Ibn Jarir al-Tabari's tafsir. He mentions, explaining this ayah, خُلِقَ عِيسَى مِنْ غَيْرِ ذَكَرٍ, that Isa was created without a father. Sorry. فَإِنْ قَالُوا خُلِقَ عِيسَى مِنْ غَيْرِ ذَكَرٍ, if this is what they say, فَقَدْ خَلَقْتُ آدَمَ مِنْ تُرَابٍ بِتِلْكَ الْقُدْرَةِ, then I have created Adam from soil with that very same power. مِنْ غَيْرِ أُنْثَى وَلَا ذَكَرٍ, without a mother or a father. فَكَانَ كَمَا كَانَ عِيسَى, and then he became just like Isa became. لَحْمًا وَدَمًا وَشَعْرًا وَبَشَرًا, with flesh and blood and hair and skin. فَلَيْسَ خَلْقُ عِيسَى مِنْ غَيْرِ ذَكَرٍ بِأَعْجَبَ مِنْ هَذَا. So the creation of Isa without a father is not more extraordinary, more miraculous than this. Okay. Right. There are some things that I'm going to have to miss out. Another thing is that Adam alayhi salam was created in Jannah. And some of the scholars have quoted the ijma' of the Ahlul Sunnah on this. There were some of the Mu'tazila that disagreed, and they said that the Al-Jannah that is referred to in the Quran about Adam alayhi salam being created there, living there, is not the Jannatul Khuld, but is a different Jannah. But Al-Qurtubi, he quotes from Ibn Battal that some of the Mashayikh have said this is ijma' of the Ahlul Sunnah, that Adam alayhi salam was created in Jannatul Khuld. And there are some explicit hadiths on this as well. One example is in Sahih Muslim, that the believers will ask Adam alayhi salam to, on the day of the believers will ask Adam alayhi salam to ask Allah to open the gates of Jannah. Ya Abana istaftih lana al-Jannah. And then Adam alayhi salam will respond, wa hal akhrajakum min al-Jannati illa khati'atu abikum Adam. So that's an explicit hadith mentioning that Adam alayhi salam was originally from the Jannatul Khuld. So of course, if we accept the evolutionary idea, that would be against this belief. And there's three ayats of the Quran where it mentions that Allah created Adam alayhi salam, and then from Adam alayhi salam he made his partner, meaning Hawa. خَلَقَكُم مِّن نَفْسٍ وَاحِدَةٍ وَجَعَلَ مِنْهَا زَوْجَهَا. خَلَقَكُم مِّن نَفْسٍ وَاحِدَةٍ ثُمَّ جَعَلَ مِنْهَا زَوْجَهَا. And also the first verse of Surah An-Nisa. Right, so that's with regards to the first human being. What about other types of living things? Now here, this is where it gets a bit murky. It's not so explicit when it comes to the nusus of Quran and Sunnah. But what is theologically favorable based on scripture is that each type of living thing had an independent, had a special origin with one individual pair, just like human beings. Right? So Allah says in the Quran, وَمَا مِن دَابَّةٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَا طَائِرٍ يَطِيرُ بِجَنَاحَيْهِ إِلَّا أُمَمٌ أَمْثَالُكُمْ. That there is no land animal and no bird except that they are communities like yourselves. And according to at least one commentary, Mujahid ibn Jabr, he said, أي أصناف مصنفة تعرف بأسمائها. That these are categorized kinds. So each type of living thing is a community like yourself. So just like the human community started with a single pair as its progenitor, we could say the same thing with other living things. And there is something in Surah Zumar where it says, وَأَنزَلَ لَكُم مِّنَ الْأَنْعَامِ ثَمَانِيَةَ أَزْوَاجٍ. And in Surah Yasin, مِمَّا عَمِلَتْ أَيْدِينَا, which these are texts which suggest that that the animals were created separately as a single pair, and then they gave rise to that community of animals. So thamaniyat azwaj meaning the eight types, meaning 4 pairs. So Allah created 4 pairs, 2 sheep, 2 goats, 2 cows, and 2 camels, as clarified in another place of the Quran. And from those pairs, you have all of the sheep, goats, cows, and camels that we have today, right? So this is what's theologically favorable. But of course, this is not qat'i to the level of like the creation of Adam alayhi salam, but it's dhanni, but it's still favorable. And there is some ambiguity, because there are some types of animals which are very similar to each other. All right, so we would say, dogs had a single pair from which they originated: bears, cats, crocodiles, sharks, whales, and so on. But then say lions and tigers. Okay, lions and tigers are very similar to each other. Did they have two separate origins, or did they originate from a single pair and then they diversified naturally later on? Or say horses and donkeys, right? They're from the same family, just like lions and tigers are from the same family. They're from the family of big cats, and they can even interbreed. They can mate and produce a hybrid young one. Same just like horses and donkeys. So would we say that they were created separately, or were they created from one pair? So there are some ambiguities, but what we would say is that, say, lions, something as different as lions and bears, they definitely had different origins. And finally, what we learn about natural processes is that they're not able to create new forms of life. And we will touch on that later on. And it's also something that's quite intuitive. So when we see new forms of life, these are literally miracles staring us in the face. Khawariqul aada. And we know that miracles are things that happen. And there are many examples of that in the Quran. Isa alayhi salam was born without a father. A camel was produced from rocks, Salih alayhi salam. And the staff of Musa alayhi salam was turned into a huge serpent. Right? So these are miracles. And one type of living thing appearing onto this earth would also be a miracle, in terms of an origin event. Obviously, each individual animal that we see, so if we see a dog or a cat on the road, we won't assume that this was miraculously created. We would assume that he had a parent. But when it comes to its origins, we don't make that assumption. Rather, based on our current knowledge, we would say that the origin of each individual type of living things was miraculous. And some people have this high opinion of science and think that science has explained everything. I just wanted to quote these two statements. One is from a mainstream science paper from 2016, we're only talking 2 years ago. So it says, the foremost amongst the unresolved problems confronting modern biology is the origin of biological complexity. So they have not explained the origin of biological complexity. The origin of the earliest fish remains a mystery, and we still seek a plausible explanation for the emergence of limbs from fins. The origin of animal form remains one of the greatest mysteries in biology. Paul Davies, a physicist, I think he's a materialist, he says the origin of life, the evolution of increasing biological complexity, all seem miraculous at first sight, and all remain largely unexplained. What I wanted to do was to move on to the science, make a start on it today, and then continue on it on tomorrow. Right. So, looking at it from a scientific perspective, and remember we're talking about it from the point of view of empirical science. The evidence for evolution is very, very weak. And we're going to look at it from the two definitions of evolution. Firstly, the first definition, universal common descent. And then the second definition, which is that natural processes are responsible for creating novelties, creating innovations in life, and creating new life forms. So the first definition of universal common descent. So with universal common descent, the first thing to notice is these two observations that I mentioned here, which everybody is familiar with, and which everybody notices. And to accept universal common descent, to accept evolution, would mean to reject what your eyes see. The first thing is that living things are perfectly designed and are engineered for their purpose. They are complete and whole. See, the idea of evolution is that things are constantly changing. So although we see whales, for example, as they are now, 10 million years down the line, the whale could transform into something else. I mean, that's the idea. But when we look at whales as they are, as it is, and I think whales is an example that I might come back to later on, it's spectacularly, remarkably adapted and designed for what it does. Right? So whales, for example, are a mammal. They're not fish, yet they live their whole life in water. Right? And they don't breathe underwater. Right? So they don't have gills with which to breathe underwater. So they come out of the water to take air, and they have these specialized features with which they are able to survive underwater. And whales in particular, for example, one thing that's amazing about them is that they can go very, very deep into the water where the pressure is very high. And if we went at that deep into the water, the pressure of the water would crush us. But whales have special adaptations because of which they can withstand that pressure. Right? They have their ribs, for example, they're not fixed in one place. Their ribs can actually move. They've got collapsible and floating ribs. And their nostril has moved to the head. So with whales and dolphins and porpoises, they all fall under one family called the cetaceans. They all have nostril on their head. It's called a blowhole, which is firmly shut. It's firmly shut with some lips. Unlike the nostrils of all other mammals, the nostrils are normally open unless we close them. Whereas with whales, it's the default is that it's shut, and then when it comes out to take air, then it's forced open using muscles from the skull. And there's many more design features of each living thing to make it suited for its purpose. That's the first observation. The second observation is living things do not fluctuate from one type to another. This is what we see. Whenever we see dogs produce dogs. Birds produce birds. Even at a small level, bacteria always produces bacteria. No matter the examples that the materialists will offer, they will give examples that of finch beaks and bacterial resistance. These are some examples which we might come back to. But nothing fundamentally changes, and even at the molecular level, with regards to bacterial resistance, there's no genuine change. In fact, if anything, it's a devolution. It's breaking things down, as we will see, inshallah. So these are observations that we can make in our day-to-day life, that things are complete, things are perfect, and things don't change. Things stay the same, which goes against the foundation of evolutionary theory. Of course, evolutionists will say that things do change, but the examples of change that they give, that they show us, or that are demonstrable, are so insignificant and don't in any way impress us with the feeling that this will change into something fundamentally new. So you see, what we're talking about is getting from a fish into a bird, through small changes, or getting from a dog or a wolf into a whale. These are the types of changes that we're talking about, through gradual changes from one type into another. And we don't see any example that this is even theoretically possible from what we observe. This is from Douglas Axe's book, Undeniable. The spider, the salmon, and the orca, the killer whale, each is strikingly compelling and complete, utterly committed to being what it is. It says Darwin's idea that life wanders from one variation to the next, never committing, always yielding to the blind force of natural selection, is plainly incompatible with the idea that the physical forms of life are expressions of something deeper, something immovable, something perfect. As in, that's the feeling that we get when we see life, when we see living things. We get the feeling that these are expressions of something deeper, that they have a meaning. They have a meaning that is complete in themselves. They don't derive from something that came before them or something outside of them. Now, one of the main evidences used for universal common descent is similarities. You see similarities between different types of living things, between human beings and chimps, or even human beings and dogs, and human beings and mice. So they say, and this similarity isn't just limited to the gross level, to the anatomical and the morphological level, right? Like mice have hands and humans have hands. Okay, so that's at one level. But even at the molecular level, even at the molecules that are used, right? The DNA is a molecule. Proteins are molecules, and even the types of proteins that are used, even the stretches of DNA, the code, and this DNA and proteins are something which we might come back to, inshallah. There's similarities between them. So they use similarities as evidence that we must therefore be related. The similar features that we have must be because we had a common ancestor. We had an ancestor that's common between us that had that feature to begin with, and then we got it from them. Now, this is not proof. See, Richard Dawkins and other evolutionists will use this as proof. This actually is not a proof. You have to look at the structure of the logical argument here. So they're saying that things are similar, and therefore they are related by common ancestry. This is not a deductive argument. This is what's called an abductive argument. Now, an abductive argument is something like, say you see the road is wet. So you see the road is wet, and then you say, so therefore it must have rained. Therefore it rained. All right, so this is like an inference to the best explanation. So you say the road is wet, so therefore it rained. But it's not necessary. It doesn't necessarily follow, because it could be that the road is wet for some other reason. So in the same way, there are similarities between human beings and between one type of living thing and another. And that similarity, yes, it could be explained by common ancestry, but it doesn't necessarily have to be explained by common ancestry. The other possibility is common design. A designer, an architect, would use similar parts in one piece of work and another piece of work, right? And we as intelligent designers are familiar with this, right? So if you have a house and a castle, you'll have the same material, the building material and bricks and so on that are used in both. right? So you use similar material, but they were both designed by a designer. So the similarity is due to the manufacturers using similar parts, not because of obviously not because of common ancestry. And this is an explanation that was favored by the biologists of the 19th century, and even some biologists that go against the stream, into the 20th and 21st centuries, because it fits the evidence better. So one of these scientists in the 19th century was Louis Agassiz, a very, very prominent scientist from Harvard. And he says, it is evident that there is a manifest progress in the succession of beings on the surface of the earth. So this is something that we're going to come back to with regards to fossils, that what we see in the fossils is that, that you have older rocks with that have fossils that represent less complex, more primitive animals that are much more that are different, are a lot more different to animals that we see on the earth today. And then as you come closer to the rocks that are more recent, you'll find that the fossils are more similar to the animals that exist today. So this might, look like you're getting there's descent, but as we will see, that there are other features of the fossils that completely contradict the idea of common ancestry. So this progress consists in an increasing similarity to the living fauna, the living animals, and amongst the vertebrates. So the vertebrates are those animals with a backbone, like fish, reptiles, mammals, and birds, especially in the increasing resemblance to man. But this connection is not the consequence of a direct lineage between the faunas of different ages. There is nothing like parental descent connecting them. The fishes of the Paleozoic age are in no respect the ancestors of the reptiles of the secondary age. Obviously, this was Darwin's idea. Nor does man descend from the mammals which preceded him in the tertiary age. The link by which they are connected is of a higher and immaterial nature. And the connection is to be sought in the view, meaning in the mind, of the Creator himself. So what we'll do is we'll continue from here tomorrow, inshallah, and we'll stop here. If there's any questions, I should have a bit of time to take questions, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم بحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك